our tendency is we want to fix it, right? And the way we fix emotions is with other emotions. But maybe the better way to fix it is actually just showing people what is true, what is right, what is good. And when you expose people to those things, then the emotions will become more secondary, not primary.
Right. I'm here with Chad Ragsdale. And what are some ways of thinking, Chad, that ways of thinking from outside the church that kind of seep into the church that are not good?
Yeah, I mean, there's a where do you begin, right?
Yeah.
I think, one of the tensions, one of the primary tensions that the church lives in this world is the reality of being seduced by the various philosophies of this world, right? So what Paul calls in Colossians chapter 2, these hollow and deceptive philosophies. Um, and the church at every age and in every culture and in every place has dealt with its own hollow and deceptive philosophies that we have to be mindful of, that we have to be sober-minded about. And I think in sort of the North American church, the North American experience, some of the principal hollow and deceptive philosophies that we have to be on guard against are, I'll just mention a few. One would be like this idea of, for lack of a better term, emotional reasoning. Just follow your heart. Just listen to your emotions, to your feelings. That what you're feeling equates to the truth, and everything that you hear needs to be filtered through the way that you might be feeling about that truth. And so we live in the type of culture that tells us over and over and over again, and our kids are told this from the time that they're very young, just the very best thing that you could do is just to follow your own heart, follow your own intuitions, follow your own emotions. And that what that does is that makes us very defensive and very resistant to hearing a word from the outside,
Hmm.
to submitting to the word of God that might challenge the way that we're thinking or feeling. To hear the word of the preacher who might say things that offend the way that we're feeling. And it sort of isolates this idea isolates us from hearing and responding to the truth well. I think another hollow and deceptive philosophy, I don't know if this is a philosophy or not. I suppose it is. But another hollow and deceptive philosophy is the extent to which our technological culture has really reshaped our thought processes and just the way that we think about our lives, the way that we think about the world, even the way that we think about God. One of the things, Daniel, that I think about a lot is a generation that grew up on Google. Google has only been around for 25 years or so. A generation that grew up on Google, how does that affect the way that they interact with and engage with God? How does that affect their discipleship? How does that affect their expectation of what it means to be a person of faith in this world? Growing up in a very technological culture, it can't help but change and affect the way that we think. And so this is a mindset. It's a philosophy that we ought to give careful consideration to and think about. How is this changing and adjusting, again, the way that we think about the world, the way that we think about God?
So, a generation raised on Google, and now being raised on Chat GPT, which is making Google seem kind of clunky,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of scrolling that you have to do. Um, what direction does that take the next generation toward? What direction are they already going to? And then, you know, keep going that direction. Like, where are we headed with that? I guess.
Boy, it's hard to tell, right? I don't think anybody has those answers yet. I think there's a lot of dust that is yet to settle from this whole artificial intelligence revolution. And I think it is a revolution, not a revolution in like the Terminator sense, that the machines are taking over or whatever. Although I suppose they are taking over just in a different way. Um, so basically, what we what I fear will happen with enhanced artificial intelligence technology. What I fear will happen is that every technology allows us to offload a part of ourselves to the technology. So you think about a hammer.
Yeah.
Well, a hammer, I offload my strength to the tool, to the device. So I no longer have, through my own brute strength, drive in a nail. Now that the hammer does it for me, right?
Mhm.
So every technology, you offload something of yourself to the technology. So the question you've got to ask yourself is something like ChatGPT, what are you offloading to the technology?
And
Well,
on that, what did we offload in the Google era, and then
yeah,
what we can offload in the chat era?
basically what we offloaded to Google was the discernment required to navigate through different information and discover information on our own. So one of the great things about Google, and it is great, but one of the great things about Google is that it basically does the sifting for you. It organizes information for you.
It
So
does
you
the
type in a
discerning for
question. Yeah. You type in a question, it gives you the answer, right?
you.
Well, with ChatGPT, it's to the next level. Now, not only will it give you information, you've also offloaded an element of your own creativity to the computer.
Mhm.
The computer doesn't just think for you. The computer also creates for you. And so I worry that the effect that that has on our discipleship, and just as human beings, frankly, but as Christians in particular, is what will that do to our sense, our, you know, the sense of creativity that God has given each one of us to actually to think deeply, to think critically, to think creatively. Like, are we causing that muscle to atrophy by giving it over to the technology?
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if there so the 2 answers you gave, and I know there are way more answers we could give, but those are 2 really helpful ones.
Yeah.
One is kind of an emotional, therapeutic way of thinking, and the other is, kind of letting something else do the thinking for us, doing the creating for us. How do you c in your mind, how do you connect those 2? What's the is there any kind of causal relationship there?
Yeah. Um, I think I think what both of them would have in common, and I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, but I think what both of them would have in common is the lack of cultivating a genuine inner life.
Mm.
So emotional reasoning, it seems like with emotional reasoning, you're only thinking with your inner life,
Seems like you're
right?
delving as deep as you possibly
Yeah.
can.
But that's not actually the case. With emotional reasoning, you're actually just kind of staying on the surface of how you're feeling just in the moment. You're not actually going deeper than that. And the
Mhm.
same is true with technology. Technology makes it really hard to cultivate a rich inner life. It's just technology isn't calibrated that way. Your smartphone isn't designed to help you develop an inner life. And we live, some people have talked about a flattened culture. We live in a very flattened culture where we exist just kind of on the surface of things. Our emotions are very much on the surface. Our technology kind of keeps us just navigating the surface. And so the spiritual life actually requires that we cultivate something deeper. We cultivate an inner life. And think about the wisest people in your life, the most spiritually mature people in your life. One of the things that they all have in common, right? They all have in common this cultivation of what we might call this inner life. You know, they have the ability to go deeper beneath the surface of things. And, you know, part of the philosophies of our, or of a major impact of the philosophies of our culture is that they keep us really just on the surface and never afford us the opportunity to go deeper.
Yeah, yeah. And that connects up with a lot of people have a very, 7-year-old's version of the faith,
Yeah.
never really encouraged to evolve past that. Yeah, I think that all goes together very effectively. The phrase moralistic therapeutic deism came to
Oh
mind
yeah.
when you said that, it's emotional reasoning. It does seem like a grid through which a lot of people make their decisions has to do with, is it therapeutic or not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that? Is that kind of
Oh
a
yeah.
common denominator?
Yeah. So moral therapy or moral therapeutic deism. This is a phrase. I think it was coined by what Christian Smith, maybe 20, 25 years ago. To really, it was his attempt to summarize a worldview that he saw developing, especially amongst younger people in North America. That their religion, for lack of a better term, um, had three characteristics. It was moralistic, so it was based on behavior, doing good, not doing evil. It was therapeutic. It was designed to help them. The principal effect of religion was to help me feel better.
Mhm.
And then it was ultimately deistic. God exists, but God is a snob God. God is not involved or much, he doesn't much care about the specific circumstances of my life. And he's basically left me alone to do what I want, when I want, how I want. And this is, I think, definitely, even though he wrote that book, over a couple decades ago, it's still very, very prevalent today. This worldview. Matter of fact, I'm reading a book right now written by Abigail Schreier, which it's a fantastic book. It just came out. It's called Bad Therapy. And the theme of that book is basically that we become such a therapeutic culture, that we've made ourselves sick in the process. We've made ourselves into sort of mental health hypochondriacs because we've engaged in so much therapeutic thinking that it's actually made us sick.
That's fascinating. As in, obsessing about something, and is it like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost?
Yeah, yeah. That's the argument that she's making, and I think she makes a pretty compelling point. You know, if you tell a person to focus on nothing but their physical health, they're either going to become a narcissist or they're going to become a hypochondriac, right? Um, and the same is true, I think, about mental health. You tell a generation, I want you to focus on nothing more than your mental health. You need to think about it. You need to think about how depressed you are. You need to think about how anxious you are. You need to constantly be ruminating on these things and talking about these things and obsessed with these things. Well, the end result is you're going to create either a bunch of narcissists or a bunch of hypochondriacs.
Is
And
that
I think we see some evidence of that.
is that, depending upon whether you have more of an active personality or more of a reactive personality,
I
you know,
think possibly. I also think those two categories can overlap too. You could have people who are both narcissistic and hypochondriacs, so yeah, but this is all under the umbrella, Daniel, like you said, of um broadly speaking, there are philosophies that exist in this world that the Christian, just the Christian in general, but specifically the Christian leader, has to be mindful of. The word that's used in scripture is sober minded. I like that, to think soberly. We've got to be sober minded about the ideas, the philosophies, especially the wisdom of this world. And we've got to be willing to critique it. We've got to be willing to challenge it. And we've got to be willing to say, even if it's unpopular, we've got to be willing to say, actually, these ideas are toxic and they're going to lead you into ruin. And sometimes it's hard to say those things. Sometimes it comes with certain social risks and consequences to say these things.
Mhm.
But nevertheless, I think it's part of our call to say them boldly.
Yeah. Before we go into the next question, when it comes to church, you know, 30 years ago, maybe, or 50 years ago, I don't think it was my experience necessarily 30 years ago that the church experience was super therapeutic. I think there was a lot of, it was very truth based, and what does the Bible teach, kind of regardless of how we felt or not. I think that, we've been afforded the luxury of being able to create church experiences that feel a lot better and that can help make us feel very inspired. Um, do you think that how would you advise, I guess, how would you advise the church leader who could create everything to make everybody feel very good,
Yeah.
worship, sermon, etc. Um, how would you advise that person, I guess?
Yeah. I think, there's nothing wrong with church feeling good, just as a principle. Um, there should be, well, I like to illustrate it this way. I'm a parent. Daniel, I know you're a parent too. Being a parent comes along with all sorts of emotions. Some of those emotions are um, transcendent, just feelings of joy, feelings of exuberance, feelings of happiness. I had one of those moments just this past weekend. My daughter, who's a senior in high school, is very involved in choir in school, and they had their last competition. It was just for a parent, it's just a very moving, emotional experience. So being a parent comes with all sorts of moments of exuberance, right? But being a parent also comes with moments of heartache, moments of frustration, moments of anger, even. Um, so if I were to grade myself on how successful of a father I am based on how I'm feeling, I'm setting myself up for a certain amount of failure, right? Because how I'm going to feel about being a parent is going to change depending on the circumstances of my life.
Hmm.
No, what makes me a parent is my my uh my relative position to my kids. So I am a parent as a consequence of bringing these children into the world on the day that they were born, or I would argue actually even before they were born. I was their parent. That is my relational posture towards them. And that relational posture doesn't change depending on how I'm feeling. Feelings obviously come along with that, but they don't dictate who I am as a parent. And I would say the same thing about being a disciple of Jesus.
Mm.
Obviously, being a disciple of Jesus comes along with all sorts of different emotions. There are moments of exuberance and joy. There are moments of just like the peace that passes all understanding that Paul talks about. But there are also seasons of desert wandering. There are seasons of disappointment. There are seasons even of doubt. So my relationship with Jesus can't simply be dictated by how I'm feeling. And if we as leaders in the church, if we are sending the message to our people that you must feel a certain way in following Jesus, we're actually setting our people up for failure. I think we have to start not with the emotional response to Jesus. We have to start with the identity of Jesus. And we've got to, I teach Hebrews, so one of the things I've always noticed about the book of Hebrews is Hebrews chapter 1. He starts not, the book of Hebrews is written to a group of Christians who is struggling in their faith, right? They're weary. They're thinking about abandoning their faith. So he starts Hebrews chapter 1, not with therapy.
Hmm.
He doesn't say, hey, buck up, things are going to get better. He doesn't start with that. You know what he starts with? He starts with Christology. This is who you need to know Jesus is. Nothing else is going to make sense in your discipleship until you first come face to face with the reality of who Jesus is. And so that's what I would advise any teacher, any preacher is like, our tendency is we want to fix it, right? And the way we fix emotions is with other emotions, you know? But maybe the better way to fix it is actually just showing people what is true, what is right, what is good. And when you expose people to those things, then the emotions will become more secondary, not primary.
And it'll be a matter of cultivating inner life that dwells upon those things,
Yeah. Yeah.
not just a quick, all right, I've got it, Jesus, Son of God, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, that's good. And being able to connect up the inner life with the practice of thinking deeply. Thinking deeply isn't just a matter of calculating the odds or even necessarily just researching something really thoroughly. It's thinking well. It deals with contemplating the majesty of God and and loving him, and
Yeah.
all these things that are a whole lot more about the inner life than just about being um, a learned person.
Yeah.
Okay, so helpful, really helpful stuff. If we have a lot of philosophies out there that are threatening to seep into here, the temptation then becomes to kind of seal off, or do a better job of sealing off, the church from the world. Uh,
Mhm.
Now, I said it's a temptation, so I'm tipping my hand. I don't think that's the
Yeah.
way to go. Uh, do you think that's the way to go? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Yeah, in the book we talk about the difference between, and we're borrowing Andy Crouch's terminology here, but the difference between gestures and postures. A gesture is a momentary, like I'm gesturing with my hands right now. A gesture is a momentary response to a certain situation or certain stimuli, right? And so gestures change depending on the circumstance. A posture, on the other hand, is more of an entrenched position. It's my fallback default position. That's a posture. And so what I would say on the question that you would ask is, there might be circumstances and occasions where it is appropriate for the church to say, I'm thinking of like Revelation, was it 17 or 18, where the church is called out of Babylon. You know, like there are appropriate times and seasons and circumstances for the church to say, you know what? We the only proper thing for us to do is to isolate ourselves from this whatever, from this thing. Um, but I don't think that that's appropriate as a posture. That might be appropriate as a gesture, but that shouldn't be our default position. That should be a circumstantial position, but not a permanent position. And I think to adopt that as a permanent position is frankly to abandon our apostolic mission to this world. Um, we do have an apostolic mission to this world. Um, Jesus has called us to go make disciples. So um, you can't make disciples by cowering in your Christian cave. We've been called to be contagious in this world, and so yeah, a posture of isolation is, I don't think, appropriate or helpful for the church.
Have you seen the movie The Village?
I have, yeah.
Great movie. I'm reminded of the principle from that movie that you can try to seal off from the outside, and keep all those influences out, but it will emerge. And I do believe that having a posture of hostility toward the world, obviously the gesture, is appropriate sometimes, but having a posture of just being very hostile to the world, kind of cultivates a pride, cultivates a callousness
Yeah.
that then kind of hastens the corruption that will eventually emerge anyway.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree with that.